than screens, it's a plot to drop the IQ. Fighting amongst each other over rumors that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood ones of holly. Suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily. The hypocrisy, this mockery, and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful. Friends, welcome back to Rogue Ways. I am Lindsay Sharman. I am your host. I am a spiritual healer and teacher. I am a shamanic journeyer. I like best to assist people in finding their inner place of connection with the highest self, with God, with Source, and also to channel through and bring through messages from the spiritual ancestors who I channel, as well as healing and blessing energy for those who choose to connect. I'm very grateful to do this work. I'm very grateful to be here with you. I have been bringing people spiritual teachings through channeled messages, through the show I do, through the work I do one-on-one with them for many, many years. You can find everything I do on rogueways.org. This is where my books are. You can get those channeled messages and more, as well as a fictional trilogy of channeled stories having to do with humanity's journey through the Yuga cycles, the Golden Age to the Dark Age and back again. You can find powerful orgone accumulators that I create there that are channeled through as well. Super powerful, beautiful pieces to have in your home, in your space, to uplift the energy there, clear negative energy, bring in all that is good, true, and beautiful. And so much more is there on the site at rogueways.org. You can connect with me one-on-one for tarot readings, for spiritual healing, for sound healing, for past life readings, and more. That's all there at rogueways.org. So thank you for being here and for being you. Today we're going to talk about universal energy. You know, we're here in material world. We're in the 3D world. We can tell that there are atoms and chemicals and elements and all the physical structures. That's the easy part. Well, life isn't so easy as a physical being, but it's easy to see the material, to understand that it exists. It's much more difficult for many people to understand what is happening here spiritually, or what spirit is, what spiritual energy is. How is it connected with our body? So today is just sort of a primer. We're going to go through the different ways people talk about this in different cultures and different societies throughout history, about some of the ways we can think about that and interacting with it. If you want to go deeper, even though in my course I don't necessarily go into all of these titles and energies that we're going to talk about today, the way you actually work with these energies is outlined in my course that's here on Gnostic TV, which is Chakras and Ascendants. It's a super powerful class. It can change your life now and for the rest of your life if you really let yourself get into it and practice these things. And of course, I'm always here to work with you one-on-one as well. So go check out that class. But otherwise, we'll get into this idea of this universal energy. And I'm going to call it universal energy, but I'm going to call it a lot of other things as we go through today. And one of them here I'm going to start with is this idea that you probably have heard most often. It's at least the most popularized in the West. And most of my audience is here in the West, so you've probably heard it. It's called prana. Right? You've probably heard the word prana. You've probably heard it most likely in connection with yoga. And yoga and prana come from the same tradition. It's the Vedic, Hindu, Eastern, Indian tradition. And that's why they would be connected at all. Some yoga classes never mention it. They're just going through the motions. They're more like an exercise class. A lot of them are, though, more spiritual, because yoga, the stretches, the poses are one of the physical yogas, one of the physical aspects. And there's many other yogas that are not physical, but we don't necessarily know that in the West usually. We don't usually understand that there's actually sort of an eightfold, sometimes more than that, set of yogas, which is to say practices, and that some of them are physical, some of them are mental, some of them are emotional, some of them are societal, how we behave in society. And prana has connection with most of them, if not all of them. In fact, prana has a connection with everything because it is a universal energy. And this is one of the ways we have an access point of understanding what this universal energy is through the idea of prana. And prana in that tradition is exactly that. It is a name for this universal energy. It is an energy that is in all things, in all places, at all times. It is most often, however, used by, actualized by life forms. So trees and people, may have more prana, perhaps depending on your conception of what is alive and what isn't, which is debatable. It is not actually completely nailed down by science even. Materialist science still has room for debate of what life is or isn't, but maybe you don't consider, for example, rocks to be alive, so maybe they'd have less prana. They'd have less movement, less motion, less energy moving through them at any given time. And you'll start to notice a lot of these concepts of this universal energy do have to do with movement. No matter how we talk about any of these things, we have to talk about everything because everything is connected and everything is in motion. There is nothing in the universe that is stagnant. And the things that are closer to stagnant are farther from what we call life. They're farther from what we call vibrant, thriving, right? Stagnant isn't necessarily good. It's definitely bad for a physical body that is alive. This is when we start to get into disease states. So we have less prana, less fresh prana moving through us. And there are many ways you can get the prana moving, especially in this tradition, right? And yoga, again, is one of them. Yoga and movement is one of them. It's physical movement, but it gets a spiritual flow going. You can feel it as you start to do yoga. You start to heat up, you start to warm up, your body starts to feel good, your muscles start to loosen. You are more in touch with your life force. And if you've taken a yoga class that does talk about prana, then you might know that one of the secrets to getting the prana moving, to getting the prana strengthened and more present within your physical body is through the breath. So you hear this, you see it, you hear about go back to the breath, come to the breath, be with the breath, breathe in, breathe out. That's because this is moving or accumulating the prana within us. It's also bringing our mind to focus on the accumulation or the creation of prana if we are aware of that aspect of the yoga or whatever it is we are doing. Because when we are focused on something in our mind, and then we're also doing something, in this case breathing or moving our body or both, and both are in alignment, then the prana is even stronger. This is the secret of all of the ways that we're going to talk about universal energy today, is that it has to do with movement and it has to do with intention. As things are moving, does your intention stay true and fixed? It's not stagnant when it's mind, right? Then it's just similar to will and choice. We have free will, we have choice. How will we use it? And when we choose to gather our prana or gather our life force by movement, by breathing, by any way, actually, then the more we are successful in that. So some people talk about it too. They're like, oh, I do yoga and then I start to have, less fear and less anxiety and more happiness and just feeling of goodness. And it isn't just that it's exercise, although that is also just good. It's good. Again, you're moving, you're doing it for your health, you enjoy it. These are all positive, life-affirming things that are going to create higher access to the universal energy or the prana. It is also that there is that intention to gather the prana, create the prana, uplift yourself, connect with a higher source, usually when we're doing things like this. So when those things are in alignment, no matter which of the forms of universal energy we're talking about, which is all just one form, it's just different ways of calling it, different ways of talking about it. When that is in alignment, then you have a stronger outcome, you have a better outcome, a higher outcome. So this is prana. Obviously not just this image, but this idea that is from the East, that is most often associated with yoga and various forms of breathing techniques and meditation. That is what prana is. That's what prana actually means. It's that life force, universal energy. In all things, most highly present and strongest in living beings. We also have from the Eastern tradition another way of calling it, and it's called chi. And Qi is the exact same thing. There is nothing we will talk about in this episode that is not the exact same thing. There's someone somewhere who won't agree with that. But the more you look into these things, and most people who study them or scholars around this topic will agree, these are different ways of describing the exact same thing. And it's that universal life force. Qi is no different. Sometimes Qi is spelled Qi most often. Sometimes it's spelled Ki or Ki in different related areas. But Qi is also this life force energy. You hear Qigong, right? Is probably the thing that you could be most familiar with. Again, it's another physical practice. We see this very similar to yoga because it is the same idea that we're going to move our bodies, and in doing so, we're going to do it in a way that is mindful and intentional of gathering life force energy within us and helping it to flow through us. Qigong is no different. You can use Qigong to fight or defend yourself, and that's the only difference. Yeah, otherwise it is the same intention, using the same energy in a similar way, just with a different name, Qi. You don't have to do Qigong to gather Qi. I'm just using Qigong as an example because some people have heard of Qigong. But Qi, again, is everywhere. It's in everything. It is in more presence when there is motion that is associated with life or being alive or living things. So along a stream where there's a forest growing around you and butterflies flying by, there's a much bigger accumulation of Qi than there is in a shopping mall with, right, electricity and, bad lighting and just, there's a lot of people there. There's not a lot of nature there. There's still Qi there. This is everywhere in all things. There's more of it, more easily accessible. Where there is life, where there is motion, where there's vibrancy, where there's thriving. So Qigong, if you learn it, you will become a master, an expert at gathering Qi within your body and using it. People imagine that it is this very difficult or far off objective to become a person who is a healer of themselves or of others or who has spiritual gifts and skills. But we have these traditions going back hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, depending on your conception of where history actually begins and what actually came before our recorded history. It's there. It's for anybody who wants to. And you would not be able to stop the Qi from flowing within you if you were doing Qigong. Although, again, it is always going to matter. What are you holding in your mind as your intention? What is your will? What is your choice around it? Are you doing it just to exercise? You're not going to have as good of an outcome. Still good, not as good. Are you doing it to gather Qi? Are you aware of the Qi? Are you aware of your breath's connection to the Qi? Are you aware of how it's moving through your body and how it feels? Well, now you're going to progress much faster. And Qigong, most Qigong masters won't necessarily tell you then how to use the Qi to heal yourself or others, but it could become pretty obvious to you if you did it. It would be hard for you to ignore how Qi feels within you, how it feels gathered within you, and how it feels when it is leaving you. And when it's leaving you, you're not losing anything, right? This is another thing. Just like the breath, you breathe in, you're not scared that when you breathe out, you're going to have lost something. Oh, no. In fact, you're very aware that breathing out is very necessary, both because then you will be able to breathe in again, but also because you're actually letting out things you don't need anymore. And it's the same with Qi, with this universal life force. However you're bringing it in, yoga, Qigong, breath, whatever, millions of possibilities. You're bringing it into you and you're letting it flow back out again, knowing it's inexhaustible, it's eternal, it's everywhere in all things. You could never fail to have access to it. And as it goes, it's going on to other places it's needed, and it is taking with it things you don't need anymore, that which no longer serves you. So whenever I'm leading meditations, which I would love to do with you if you would like to come join, and various things that I do over time, you can always find all of that on rogueways.org. When I'm leading meditations, we really focus on bringing in the breath, bringing in that light of life and that life force energy, and then releasing what no longer serves us. That can be anything from toxins, bacteria, parasites, physical and mental and emotional and spiritual parasites, negative emotions, old baggage, traumas. All of it can leave you with the breath out. All of it can leave you with the release of the chi that you have gathered. That is healing. And so this is chi. Another thing, and less commonly talked about, is orgone energy. And so here's this image. We're most familiar, if you've heard of orgone, we're most familiar with it usually because we've seen little trinkets at spiritual fairs or in spiritual places. And again, I make orgone. It's very different from any orgone you've ever seen. I'll guarantee you that. I was taught to make orgone by my spiritual guides and allies. I was called to make it. I resisted it, as I resist everything that I do, actually. They're used to dealing with me in that way. But I was finally encouraged enough to start doing orgone, and what I created is very different from anything I've ever seen. And I've seen hundreds and hundreds of different people's orgone they make, and they're all the same. And that's okay. Those are also beautiful and powerful, and what I make is very different. And I'll say, perhaps I'm biased, much more powerful, much more pure, much more beautiful than a lot of people's. Because a lot of people are just kind of following a book, or they're just doing it because they think they can make money, which is even dirtier. Or they're just like, well, this is just what other people do, so I'm going to do the same, right? It's not bad. This is how we learn things. We copy other people. But eventually, if you're really in touch with your life force energy and this universal energy we're talking about, you would be different from most people. And exactly how you do things would be unique because you are a unique form of the life force itself, here to express yourself uniquely. So it makes sense to me why mine is different from anyone else's. You can go check it out and you can see there on rogueways.org in the shop. But if you've heard about orgone, this is how you've probably heard about it, is as these things. That's not actually orgone, those little objects, right, that look perhaps like this image here or similar to it. That's not orgone. Those are actually technically called orgone accumulators. And most people don't say that because no one wants to, because it doesn't sound as fancy, because it doesn't sound as cool, because you won't buy it as easily. But if you just say it's orgone, that's easy, right? And that's the only reason why. No one's trying to hide anything. No one's trying to do anything inappropriate or incorrect, but it's just not. It's not orgone. It's orgone accumulators. It's okay to call it orgone. As long as you know what orgone actually is another name for this universal energy. And it was first coined as such by Wilhelm Reich, and he is a much maligned scientist who was suppressed and demonized and hated in the earliest part of the 20th century. So he discovered this life force energy, which, again, he didn't really discover it. It's been known by every culture all throughout history, just has a different name in each one of them. But he rediscovered it, and he looked at it through a materialist lens. He's a scientist. So he wanted to know, what is it? How do you use it? Where does it come from? Where does it go? Like, what's it good for? And what he discovered is that, and here's where it gets taboo. Here's where it gets uncomfortable for people. Although if you're an objective person and you just think about it, it's actually pretty obvious. But he discovered that the highest amount of orgone energy could be measured during the human orgasm. And that's why he called it orgone. Similar roots, right? Similar root words. Orgasm, orgone. That makes people very uncomfortable. And that's just our society. We're just a little bit repressed on the sexual side. We don't like to talk about it. We don't like, especially the orgasm itself. That's like it's a big deal to some people to talk about this. So of course he was, especially at this time period where it's just still very much more repressed than we are now. Now, not such a big deal. It would be a lot easier for him to have been talking about this right now. Of course, he'd be just as maligned and suppressed because there's a lot of people interested in you not having the keys to your own birthright and existence as a sovereign being of pure life force energy. So he'd still be suppressed, but maybe he'd have a little bit easier time talking to people about it. But again, you can just imagine, where in your life do you have more energy rush through you than at the moment of orgasm? It doesn't often happen any other way. Perhaps during childbirth. It's the only other thing I can think of that could come close. Just in terms of the energy that moves through your being. And remember, we talked about the motion of it is essential. The capacity to bring it in and release it is essential. The capacity to understand it and feel it in you is essential. And so you can understand why this is the moment of highest naturally occurring orgone. This is also, just as a side note, why many traditions use the orgasm or lack thereof in their magic, in their traditions, in their mysticism. It is one of the doorways to awakening what we call the Kundalini, which is just another word for this universal life force, but this time specifically as it moves up through you and through your chakras. You can go to the Chakras and Ascendancy course if you want to learn more about that and how to use it. So it's a way you can use it. You don't have to either. It doesn't matter. But it is a thing. It's a tool. If you like to use all your tools, there's another one, and it is your sexuality. And this is inherent in the universe too. Sexuality is inherent in the universe. Male, female is inherent in the universe. This is a naturally occurring duality that is separate. And when it comes together, creation happens, right? Creation happens. Orgasm is connected to creation. This is a high level of energy, actually. So this is what orgone actually is. Orgone then, because of Wilhelm Reich's work, was found to be able to create or destroy clouds and cloud structures. People now use this in order to destroy chemtrails, or what the government calls stratospheric aerosol injection. They use orgone. They use what they call cloud busters, which is a type of orgone device. They also use orgone to put next to 5G towers to sort of help diminish some of the negative effects of the 5G towers. This is not scientifically testable. It is something that spiritual people can feel and understand and tell. I'll tell you a secret. You don't have to have orgone next to the 5G tower to disrupt it. You yourself are an orgone accumulator. Just like we talked about, you yourself are a prana moving device. Just like you yourself are a chi channel. You are an orgone accumulator. So you can create an orgone accumulator that is in addition to you, your body, your mind, your heart, your soul. And you can have that around, you can use it. And that's why I make them. They're just additional boosts to whatever you're doing. You can kind of program them with your intention and let them be there. But you could also just do that yourself. Right? And like we talked about, especially if you're learning how to gather it, how to build it, how to use it. Again, go take the Chakras and Ascendance course. If you're doing that, well, then you really can do this. You can really affect your environment in positive ways. You can manifest more easily, heal yourself and others more easily. The list goes on. What is the extent of what you can do with life force energy? There isn't one. This is the whole universe is made of it. Every possible potentiality is orgone, chi, prana's expression. So this is the eternal life force energy, and orgone is just one more name for it, right? And there's that tradition with Reich specifically and specific orgone accumulator devices and connected with the orgasm and that understanding. But there are more. We also have the idea of vril. Vril, V-R-I-L, vril, is another conception. And this one may be even more taboo than orgone. And the idea of orgone and the ideas surrounding orgone. Vril was perhaps popularized by, or is best known by, its connection with the Nazis. And the Nazis had what it was called the Vril Society, which was like a secret society that was interested in spiritual matters. And despite what people might believe, the Vril Society doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything negative that the Nazis did or didn't do. It was just a popular society at the time. Hitler seemed interested in the ideas and the possibilities of understanding spirituality on a more, let's just say, materialist or scientific level. You know, we have this huge separation of materialism versus spirituality, and Hitler was like, why? Let's bring it back together. Our ancestors did, so maybe there's something we're missing here. And so the Vril Society was popular, and a lot of higher ups in the Nazi and SS organizations were part of the Vril Society. So if you've heard of Vril, you've probably attached it to that, and because of the obvious notoriety of Hitler and what happened there, there's negative associations with it. But there doesn't have to be, because Vril is just another name for the eternal life force energy. Vril is the name for an eternal life force energy. It's just an Eastern European name. That's it. Well, and they even say they got it from the East, right? So maybe it's a sort of Germanized word that they got from the East. Vril. They say they got it from the Aryans, which is the Indians of India, and that the word is Vril. And so Vril is another type of life force energy. This, again, it feels a little bit more like orgone in that it is a little bit more applied to sort of like the idea that it's a technology, that we can harness it and use it, that we might be able to make flying craft, for example, that are anti-gravitic or, don't need fuel, super green energy. And so it has that connotation as well. Not just the Hitler thing, also this sort of technological aspect. But again, in its own naked state, it is just the energy itself. It is just another word for the energy itself, Vril. So you start to see then why it might also be confusing, or it might even suppress sort of innovation or self-awareness or a higher level of consciousness in society when we have all these disparate ways of talking about the same thing, and we have people working on different angles of it throughout history, and we're never really connecting it all. So the more you understand that all of these people are talking about the same thing in slightly different ways, applying it in slightly different ways, some externally, some internally, all of them having to do with this universal life force that is eternal and ever present, then you get to understand yourself better. And that is actually the one true key. It's all within you. So the more you know, the easier that is. And that's Vril, a little bit shrouded in some secrecy, some fear, and some really negative energies and ideas. But it itself is not actually connected to any of those things. It itself just is this universal energy. And that's the Vril. There's the idea as well with the Vril Society, which focused on women as larger conduits for this energy. And that's not untrue. Men and women both have, we can say, equal opposite access to the universal life force energy. That should be obvious to anybody. This is why men and women come together and create, right? We have equal opposite parts of this creation energy, this life force energy. And the reason the Vril Society focused so much on women is because they've been somewhat suppressed in the spiritual traditions in various ways, especially by that time. Their role had been sort of forgotten, you could say. Not necessarily because they're actually, better or bigger or any higher access, but just that primarily was forgotten. And so it feels bigger, but also it is, in a way, true. Women can potentially receive more Vril or life force energy in order to then create or manifest. And men would be the other half of that. They would be the directing force around it, its expression in the world, and also the protector of the women as they're receiving all this energy. Women, therefore, may have more intuition, more psychic abilities, more precognition. Because it also just depends on the person themselves and whether or not they are accumulating the orgone, taking in the Vril, taking in the prana, understanding it and directing it. And if men are the ones who are going to do that more often, they're going to be better. If women are, then they're going to be better. So you see what I mean. But women, we are the womb. We are the negative space. And so we are the receivers, and we can receive a lot. We can receive a lot. And so Vril was slightly focused on that. One more thing before we move on from Vril. Vril Society members were pretty focused on growing their hair out as long as they could, the women. because they understood that the hair was sort of like an antenna for the very high level faculties that are available in our higher chakras, and which are in our head or around our head. So again, go to the chakras and ascendants course if you want to learn more for yourself about that. But it's something you can think about, growing your hair out and why you might do that. Many traditions throughout history have focused on the hair and growing the hair out, and the Vril Society was just another one of them. So after Vril, we'll talk about the ether. The ether, maybe we've kind of gone from like the pure spiritual to like the much more sort of materialist side of things and the way that we call things. And ether is a very scientific concept. It's a materialist science Western concept. However, it is yet another name for this eternal, subtle energy that is in, around, and running through all things and is the primary life force. Ether is another way to describe it. Ether has also been incredibly suppressed. All of the scientists who have focused on studying and documenting ether and etheric currents have been suppressed or maligned. And these etheric currents might be most similarly related to what we might call plasma and plasma currents, plasma energy. They're technically separate things. They're very, very close together. I would say ether is just on the other side of material. It's more purely spiritual, or what we would call spiritual, and plasma is just one step into the material from there. Right, so plasma currents and ether are very similar phenomenon. And again, all of those scientists who study this have been suppressed. Their labs have been burnt down. Their published works have been maligned. They've been decried as basically heretics of the materialist world, but actually quacks. They're always quacks, right? And it doesn't matter how many people verify their results, how many people debunk the debunking of them over time. More often we have that, but we still are always led back to the one thing that claims that they're the quacks or they're the crazy ones. In fact, there's many experiments you can do yourself that can reinforce the understanding that ether is real. You have to start to ask yourself, after we talk about enough of these different types of this universal energy, why it's so suppressed. And it's an easy answer. You are only controllable by anyone for any reason. It doesn't matter who the they is in the equation at all. You are only controllable by other people when you are ignorant of yourself, of your divine birthright, and of this highest level energy that is within you at all times, that can be accumulated at even greater levels and can be used intentionally by you to do things that we would call superhuman or paranormal. And all of those things are documented too. You can find, way before AI existed, videos of monks lighting things on fire with their hands in the cold. You can see monks sitting out in an ice storm, perfectly warm, with the ground all around them melted. No electric devices with them, no fire. Just them, just their connection to the life force energy. You can watch monks being ran at with a sword that you've just had demonstrated that it can cut through wood, that it could cut through pumpkins, that it is sharp, that it is not dull, ran at with a sword and just stopped mid-air, right at the energy field of that monk. You can see that before we had these editing techniques that would make that so easy to fake. And if you're very lucky, you can meet one of these people and watch them do it with your own eyes. So the ether is very real. Western science has tried to show what is obvious to anyone who pays attention long enough, that there is something that is a subtle energy, that it is everywhere at all times, that we could call it a universal life force, or that we could call it ether, or that we could go a step towards the material more, call it plasma, that we could call it prana or chi, that we can use it, that we could prove all of these things. We can prove then that we also have higher levels of psychicness, of telepathy, of telekinesis, of all kinds of, again, superhuman or paranormal things. We can prove that, and we can prove that they are highly available to those who know that this energy exists and practice it, like monks, qigong, high-level yoga practitioners, and more. We can prove that, and it's still ignored and suppressed. We have tons of peer-reviewed, lab-created results, documented over and over, repeatable, still suppressed, still called crazy. Still people pretend like it isn't proven. This is how tightly our minds are controlled and the information is controlled. More so, the experience of the information is controlled. And so you free your mind when you start to look into these things. You free your mind and you start to be able to understand the world you live in. Like I said, you start to understand yourself and you start to understand your birthright. And this is actually one of the most dangerous things to anyone who would ever control you, anyone who would ever suppress you for any reason, is that you know yourself. So it's imperative that you understand this universal energy and you understand your connection to it, that you understand that it's very real, it's very material, it's very physical, it exists, it's provable. And if you want to, you get to choose any of these ways to talk about it, right? If you want to talk to people about it at all, you get to decide, am I going to take the really materialist side? Because that's what people might be more comfortable with. And I'm going to talk about ether. Again, am I going to talk about the sexual side? Because my friends are really into that. We'll talk about orgone. Or am I going to talk about the purely spiritual, the prana, the chi, or some other method? You get to decide, because these are all names for the same thing. And the most sort of woo-woo, airy-fairy, and also the truth is that this is also just love. And that's hard for people. That's hard for people because, again, people are like, well, you can't prove love. Well, you can. You want to prove love, you can watch a mother lift a car off her baby. You can't explain that in any other way. People are like, oh, it's adrenaline. Sure. But like, what caused the ability of that much to suddenly get created and rush through your body, for all of your muscles to receive it so instantly? Everything in your mind, your heart, your will was unified in action for this one goal and one motivation: pure love. And now suddenly you're a Superman. Like, you can just do that. And we have millions and billions. I could do endless shows just on examples of how love turned people into superheroes. Endless stories of it. We know that it exists. We know that it's real. And we know the motivating force behind it is love. We know that. It's obvious. We just don't have a culture and habit of talking about it. Instead, we have a culture and a habit of suppressing it, of being mocked. If I say this in the wrong crowd, I would be laughed out of the room as an idiot, as a hopeless romantic, as a naive, stupid person. But we all know it, actually. You couldn't deny it. If you broke it down to someone, if they had the capacity to pause for a moment and just really listen, they would have to admit it. That love is actually the name of this force, that we can call it ether, we can call it prana, we can call it chi, we can call it orgone, we can call it vril. But it's love. It's love, and it's authentic love. Right? We have all of these watered down versions of love in our world. In fact, I think it's the Greeks that have 20 some names for love, different types of love. There's love between a friend. There's love romantically. There's love for a mother to her child. There's love of God. There's transcendent love. Love for self. There's all kinds of love. But we can all also understand that there's been times where we've called something love and it's like kind of watered down. We're like, I love you. But it's like, you know, as like a distant sort of person who I genuinely have compassion for and would do anything for, and also like don't want to spend time with you, but I love you, right? It's a very different love than the love that we have for our dog or our best friend or our children. So we have all these different types of love. We have all these different qualifiers on love, but we all also understand that there is a transcendent love, that there's a love that is so pure, we call it unconditional. And I will promise you, you've never had unconditional love from a human. We'll say it. We'll say, I unconditionally love you. We don't mean that. Nobody does. There's definitely conditions. If the person you're saying that about goes and slaughters 500 people, you won't love them in the same way. You still might be able to say, I love them as a soul. I have this higher level. That's the transcendent love. And it's not actually going to be present, really. You're not going to be able to walk up to that person and treat them exactly the same, right? So you can just understand what I mean, that it's not actually unconditional. We can come close sometimes, but it's not actually unconditional. In fact, the unconditional love, this is what we associate with God and with Source for a reason. It's that we aren't yet purely that. We aren't yet pure universal life force energy. We aren't yet pure Source and God love. And if we were, we wouldn't be here in a body. We would not be doing the earth thing. Part of being here in our body is to remember that, to understand ourselves, to know ourselves as that, and to start making choices that align with it, to remove all the things that aren't that. And you wouldn't be here if you were done doing that. So you don't have unconditional love to give. You do have the ability to open up to it and let it come through you. That's the sort of end result of all of these practices, of all of these attempts to be in more deeper alignment, be in more presence with the universal life force energy. That's the goal of them, right? We can say it's to be in the pranic flow, in perfect pranic presence. We can say that it's to have the chi be at the highest level it can be in our physical body moving through us. We can say that it's to create the orgone field around us, through this orgone accumulation that is so powerful that we can, affect our reality or live in contented bliss. We can say all of those things, and it is to really become one with the Source again, one with God's love again. Same difference, right? These are just the steps we're taking towards it. So love is another way to call this universal life force energy. You can call it that if you want. As I've been calling it this whole time, universal life force energy is a perfectly good way to call it too. I call it that because it kind of encompasses all of them, right? It is universal. It is very much about life and living and thriving in that movement that we were talking about. And it is a force or an energy that actually exists, that is measurable in many ways, that is knowable in many ways, and that all life has. And I'll tell you another secret. There's nothing that isn't alive. There's nothing that doesn't have a soul. Nothing. Everything, every object, every item, its coherence, this pen, it exists as an information field in this universe. That is its soul. I mean, you might seem to us to be small or insignificant or unimportant, but it's here for a reason. We created it. We're using it. Here it is. So again, you can kind of see a spectrum from like the inanimate, but it still has life force energy in it. Somebody put their life force into making this. We conceived of it, we designed it, we went and gathered the materials, we pushed them into certain shapes, we made this. Of course it has life force energy. A planet does, a solar system does, a galaxy does, the universe does. All we're talking about is scales here. Where are you moving in and out and looking at the life force energy from what level? What level of aliveness, right? What level of motion? How close or far is it from Source or its own independent ability to know itself as such? Then we can start putting it on a spectrum based on that. But there is nothing that doesn't have it. Everything is this. You may, as we're talking about this universal life force, start to say, like, isn't it all of this described in Star Wars and called the Force? Yeah, it is. It is. Midichlorians are mitochondria. So this is the universal life force. It is in all things at all times. It is perfect. It is ever present. You cannot destroy it. You cannot create it. It just is. You can gather it, focus on it, intend it, choose it, strip away everything that isn't that more and more. You can do all those things. You can do plenty. That's plenty. And that's universal life force energy. And the final way I'll give you to call this today is just consciousness. Consciousness is exactly the same as what we're talking about. And consciousness is another thing. It sort of splits the difference, right? It's sort of materialist. It's like a scientific way of trying to describe something, and yet scientists cannot define it, and they don't know what it is. They cannot define it, and they don't know what it is. Unintelligent people who think they're scientific may pretend that they know what consciousness is. That happens a lot. When you get down to it, no, there is not an accepted definition of consciousness. We don't know what it is. We talk about it all the time. We know it's real. We can look at it and we can say, there's consciousness. And yet we cannot tell you what it is. Nobody can. And consciousness is another way of describing this universal life force. We as humans have so much of it that we call ourselves conscious beings. A rock has so little of it that we say it does not have consciousness. Well, I'll tell you again, this is another secret. It does actually. It has universal life force energy. It is a soul. No matter how far from source that seems to us, it is actually an information field. And it exists, and it has some rudimentary level of self-awareness. We won't acknowledge that as a species, as science definitely won't. I know that. And any significantly progressed or sufficiently progressed spiritual person knows that. They know it because they experience it, because when you're in a spiritual space, you can see the life force of all of these things, and they don't lack it. And you can see how much you have, and you can say, oh, that's way more. It's way brighter. It's way more organized or coherent. It's way more conscious of itself, technically, but it's not actually different. And so consciousness is another thing we can put on that spectrum. We can see how little some things have and how much some things have, and we don't know how else to describe it. We cannot define it. It is everywhere in all things at all times. And some say the universe just is consciousness itself. It is a mental universe. It is source or God knowing itself. And these are the billions and billions of infinite ways it's doing so. And we are a part of that. Just a piece. Just a fractal level on the giant fractal that is the universe. Here we are, the universe knowing itself. This is consciousness. And so you may also notice that you have had more or less conscious presence in your life. And so you can also relate to the ability to create and gather more of it, or ignore it and watch it go away. You can look through periods of your life where you kind of were in a blur and things just went by, and there's all kinds of reasons. There's no judgment here. You can just see that and say, yeah, I had a lot less presence and a lot less consciousness then. And now here I am thinking about consciousness, thinking about universal life force energy, and maybe also doing practices and trying to gather it within myself. And I notice that I have more of it, that I am more vibrant, that I am more aware, that I am more able and capable of noticing things in general. That's consciousness. When you have more chi, when you have more orgone, when you have more vril, when you have more prana, when you have more life force energy, you are more conscious, you are more present. When we talk about increasing our self-awareness and being more present, now you know what it means. You are closer to love, you are closer to the universal life force, you are more in alignment with it. And that is consciousness. Those are all of the ways that you can think of the universal life force energy, the universal energy that is in all things, binds all things, creates and destroys all things, is awareness itself, is love itself, is life itself. And everything else is just details. How did it actually come together? What form is it in here? Why? What is its karma, etc.? Those are all other questions. And I would invite you again to go do the Chakras and Ascendants course here on Gnostic TV. It's going to change your life when you do. And I'm happy to be able to offer that to you all. I'll also remind you that I am Lindsay Sharman. This is Rogue Ways, my show I've been doing for quite some time, also then here on Gnostic TV most recently. I do offer soul services and healing at rogueways.org. Like I talked about, I do tarot, I do one-on-one sessions of all kinds, healing, sound healing, spiritual guidance, channeling your spiritual guides and allies, and more. You can book sessions there at rogueways.org. I do meditations at times. I do 1 day of brightness, solstice, and equinox celebrations. And I do what I call the Lightning Oracle Tuesdays, which you see here at the bottom. And that's also there on rogueways.org. Or you can go straight to calendly.com/rogueways and just book directly there. Otherwise, it's linked to from the site, and you can book through either. Calendly.com/rogueways is where you can book directly. If you want to read those channeled messages, you can get those books at rogueways.org. You can also go to rogueways.substack.com, and I put out channeled messages weekly, if not more frequently, from the spiritual ancestors on any topic, any current event or any topic or whatever they want to talk about at the time or whatever people are asking me about at the time. And so you can read those channeled messages from the spiritual ancestors there at rogueways.substack.com. Those are all the best ways to be connected and in touch with me. And otherwise, I hope you travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.
Yeah, come on, Rat Kings, baby. It's the rap machine. Yeah, check it. Gray bearded pirate, my motherfucker unknown. Yeah, come on. In the place with my fist up, meaning I resist the bullshit that they feed us and lead us. This is just a part of the process, man. Just watch this, cause this shit's about to get crazy like a mosh pit. We lost it, toss it, let's start it again. Cause now with technology, with smarter men and women, this is the beginning, not the end. If this is the message of hope that I send, look on your TV, it's a culture of death. They'll keep on lying to the very last breath. We keep on striving and spreading the truth. It's hard to survive in this world for the youth. The door is closed, the old world is dead. Let's have an age of understanding instead. I'll include you and you include me. Let's see what we can build with some positivity. Let's go, you're moving too slow. Let me see your hands if you know what I know. Come on.
Rap like mummy, ain't no dummy in my rhyming. Started flowing freestyling, now they rhyming loud silence. On with the violence, bodies piling with the gray-bearded pirate. On your TV in 4K 3D virtual reality. Casualty of urban warfare. I know but I'm not scared, just prepared and aware. Shining my light through the tunnel of hope. Into the rope, but I'ma give it one more pull. Till the family is full. Take the bull by the horns and lead it to the slaughter. That would be harder and you would be softer. Sometimes I'm a monster, and you forever imposter, with your champagne and lobster. This royalty, the way it was supposed to be. Hopefully the new door opens and the old one closes, with way more focus and growth to mold us, and the truth that they should have told us.
To them screams, it's a plot to drop the IQ. Fighting amongst each other over rumors that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood wands of holly. Suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily. The paupers see this mockery and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet. Everyone got a gift, everyone got a light. They want you to forget that ish, cause they can't dim the bright. The positive vibration takes you past the sign shackles, from the sewers and the alleys into moving castles. Who these assholes really serving with an exposed Achilles surgeon around the corner lurking to prove ascension trumps perversion? Learn them to catch fish and unplug the signal. Show them the simpletons now build the fucking temples.